We're going to videotape it anyway, so.
Okay.
It's taping.
All right. So, I welcome everyone who is here in this room. I welcome everyone who will be watching this later for, I think, an important and inspiring talk this evening. Jim has been a part of UCM for several years, and he's recently ordained, 3 months. In May he was ordained, and this is the first time he's going to be sharing with us as an ordained minister. And he's going to be talking, some of you probably have read the little blurb, that's how you knew he was going to be talking tonight. So you know that he's going to be talking with us and sharing his experience of combat-induced post-traumatic stress disorder, which is on the extreme end of a spectrum of post-traumatic stress injuries. And Jim can speak from his own personal experience, as he is a combat veteran, having spent 3 years in Vietnam from 1966 to 1969. So he knows the experience from the inside. And he also knows, afterwards, all the years that he's lived with those experiences, he knows what was helpful to him when he spoke with other people and other people spoke with him, and what was not helpful. And I believe he's going to be sharing some of those experiences with us, because as ministers or as members of the community, most likely we will come in contact with people who are living with some kind of post-traumatic stress injury. And specifically tonight we'll be talking about the combat-induced post-traumatic stress disorders and injuries. So I know that you will listen with devoted attention to what he shares with us from his own experience. And there will be time at the end for you to ask some questions if you like, okay? So Jim, I invite you to stand in front of everyone.
I'd like to start out with a disclaimer. In the blurb, I said we'd have veterans, first responders, survivors, or victims, and I talked with a friend that I trust, and she said that if I try to get too many people up here that I'd overload the hour and make it hard for you to get the gist of what we're doing. So it's just going to be me tonight. I'd also like to issue a warning. In the blurb, the important sentence is, learn what it feels like. So what we're going to be concentrating on tonight is what it feels like. So hang on tight.
Okay, real good. Thank you. I'm going to be picking up the report on Monday, and I'll bring it over to you if that's okay. Okay, real good. Have a good evening.
It's next door.
Tink, tink, tink. Boom! I was asleep a second ago, but there's no mistaking that sound. Tink, tink, tink. Boom! One hand grabs around the hard plastic of my rifle, the other snags my web gear. Incoming! Tink, tink, tink. Boom! I shove my feet in my boots and out the door. Tink, tink, tink. Boom! Hang time is about 10 seconds. A good crew can get 10 in the air before the first one hits. We don't dare use a light and make ourselves targets. Fortunately, there's a little moon shining through the cloud cover, and I can make out the bunker as a blacker black against the black sky. Tink, tink, tink. Boom! The first round lands. It's not close, but the flash from the explosion destroys my night vision. Blind, I run face first into the back of the bunker. Shit, shit, shit. I have blood in my mouth, and I'm sure my nose is broken. The second round lands. I feel along the rough weave of the sandbag until I find the opening and pile in. I'm curled up on the floor in a back corner with my fingers in my ears and my mouth open, trying to equalize the pressure so the sound doesn't burst my eardrums. It fills my universe. It pounds me like a mallet. I hear screaming. It might be me. I can't tell. As abruptly as it started, it's over. My ears are ringing and I'm dizzy as hell. I'm grateful to be alive, but I've got a job to do. Shaking my hair to clear it, I scoot over to the door and take up a position, looking back into the camp. Sometimes our little playmates like to blow through the razor wire while the rounds are falling and send in sappers with bags of explosives to throw in the bunkers. Bunkers are great for keeping explosions out, but they're even better for keeping explosions in. It will only take a chunk of C4 about the size of a grapefruit to turn us all into 1,000 pounds of tomato paste. So blinded by the flashes and deafened by the explosion, it's my job to kill anything that doesn't look or sound American. After an hour, it's clear there won't be a sapper attack, so the squad leader starts handing out cans of food. What do I get? Ham and lima beans. Hell, even the starving locals won't eat ham and limas. Ham tastes like slimy pencil erasers, and the limas are the consistency of hominy grips mixed with lard. Kelly set up a stove, but I don't bother. Heating it won't make it taste any better. Instead, I hand him my canteen cup. What I get back is 20 ounces of hot coffee, 2 packets of government-issue instant tainted with iodine from the water purification tablets. God, that tastes good. My nose dripped enough blood on my t-shirt that it's sticking to my chest, but the bleeding itself seems to have stopped. I use a little of the coffee to wash the blood off my face and dry off on my sleeves. My nose doesn't seem to be broken, and I'm not bleeding. I guess I won't be getting a Purple Heart after all. But my shirt's wet, and I'm starting to shiver. Fortunately, I was wrapped up in my poncho liner when the shooting started, and I brought it with me. Best piece of equipment the Army ever made. This nylon quilt is big enough to be a blanket, weighs nothing, warm, dries in 10 minutes, silky smooth against the skin. If the damn thing would just learn to cook, I'd marry it. I wrap it around me, wet shirt and all, and feel the warmth seeping back into my body. I really get into the night. Off to my right, I hear a generator running at the other end of the compound. Behind me, a couple of guys are talking about their families in whispers. Off to my left front, about 50 yards away, I hear somebody walking around outside the next bunker. To my left rear in the village, a quarter-mile away, I hear a baby crying. Not being able to see just powers up my hearing. My nose is cleared up and working again. I wish it wasn't. Every guy in the bunker's been out on a piss break at least twice. The spot they use is only 10 feet away. It's starting to smell like a urinal around here. The cloud cover cleared off before sunrise. There are no clouds, because there are no clouds to light up and turn pink. The sunrise is completely uneventful. The world goes from dark to light, and the sun's up. Blah. The countryside is beautiful. Jungle-covered mountains to the west, Pacific to the east. Every inch of land between terraced for rice cultivation. It's almost an Iron Age lifestyle out there. Water buffalo for draft animals, hand tools to get the work done, light, cooking, and heat from wood fires, communication by walking over to someone and actually talking to them. Then I look at the civilization that we've brought. Razor wire, sandbags, ugly green buildings, generators that run all night, noise pollution, light pollution, air pollution. Is it really an improvement? We get the word to stand down and start walking to the mess hall. The first chore of the day is latrine detail. The guys stuck with this job drag out the cut down 55-gallon drums that sit under the holes in the latrines and pour fuel oil in them, then set them on fire. So like every other morning, we eat breakfast surrounded by the smell of burning shit. 43 more days and I'm out of here. I remember one time we had just come back from an operation. Things relaxed. There was this kid who came around selling rice wine and sugar cane. He was about 12 or so. I could never tell how old these people were, but he wasn't very old. His bicycle was booby-trapped and suddenly exploded in our midst. We lost about 8 guys there. Worst part of it was that I had to shoot the kid as he was running away. It was my first kill. If I close my eyes right now, I can be there. I don't want to blow him away. I said, God, let me hit him where it don't get hurt. I just wanted to stop him. What's the use of stopping him? So for some reason, I aimed my rifle at the base of his neck, where I could hit him right in the head. It seemed that I held it for hours and hours, and it took forever to pull the trigger. But I know it was only a couple of seconds. It all flashed in front of me in slow motion. The bullet making impact and him rolling over, becoming a dead heap in the middle of the road. We came on the village about an hour before first light. At a clump of palms, I posted 2 riflemen and a radio operator to guard our rear. The rest of the platoon moved into position to search the village. About the time we were in place, I got a call from my rear guard that someone was walking up the trail. Now the whole country is under dusk to dawn curfew, so anyone walking around at this hour could be assumed to be an enemy soldier. Also, if he's walking up the rear of my platoon, I can't afford to care what he is. If he makes a noise, he'll get us killed. I told the guards to take care of it, quietly. The sweep through the village didn't turn up a damn thing. Best we could tell, the Viet Cong we were looking for left at least an hour before we arrived. The guy walking up our rear was actually a girl, lying on the ground with her throat cut. She was 4 months pregnant. We didn't care. She was VC. She was carrying a VC cadet. Combat is not like anything that you experience in real life. That's what I was talking about when I said PTSD is, on the one hand, the most familiar because we've been dealing with it for 40 years. On the other hand, the least accessible, because unless you've been there, it's absolutely incomprehensible. There's nothing like it in the United States and the civilian world. Now, some parts of the world, like say Syria, or say maybe El Salvador, you have a violent enough environment so that you get a close approximation. But here in the U.S., the worst neighborhood in the country isn't anywhere near what a combat zone is. We start off with training. Basic training is designed to take a civilian and make him a soldier. What that means is that what you have to do is take a person who's an ordinary, laid-back, nice guy and turn him into a professional killer. That means that you have to teach him to stop looking at people as human beings and start looking at them as dangerous objects. You have to see them as a dangerous object, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do your job, which is to kill them. They also work on getting rage. If you're dealing with an enemy, it's easier to kill them if you actually hate them. So they work on that. They also work on reaction. A lot of the harassment you get in basic training is to just get you to follow orders without thinking about it. Okay? You can't think about it in the middle of a battle. It's important. On the other hand, when it's time to be a civilian again, it makes it a lot more difficult. Also, in Vietnam at least, there was a certain racist element to it. It wasn't put in there deliberately, but it was sort of built into the situation. We were dealing with soldiers that looked just like civilians, and civilians that could be soldiers. So after a while, it's hard not to think in terms of anything that's not American as the enemy. Nowadays, in the Gulf War, where at least in Vietnam, most people were sane about getting themselves killed, right? What we consider to be a sane reaction, which is that they would avoid getting themselves killed if they could. In the Gulf War, you don't even have that. So the people that you're dealing with over there are even less predictable than what we were dealing with. The fact that any person you see, you look around you, any person you see that's not in a green uniform could be trying to kill you. Okay? The other thing about battlefield combat is that it's completely random. It's a dangerous job, like driving on the freeway is dangerous, and you do what you can to improve your survival, just like you would as if you're driving on the freeway. You become a better driver, and so on. But there's always a random element to it. A feeling of defeat came over me. I hadn't felt like that in a long time. And then I remembered a time in Vietnam when a couple of guys got killed at our base camp perimeter. They'd gone down to the dump in a Jeep to get some charcoal for a barbecue and got ambushed. Here we were in base camp where nothing ever happens. And the sergeant, one of my best buddies, got blown away looking for charcoal so we could have a cookout. I sat on an ammo box and felt so defeated I couldn't even cry. I felt that only my skeleton prevented me from slipping off and becoming a puddle of useless, meaningless meat. The heat beat down on me like an iron fist, and my stomach was groaning with diarrhea pains. The jungle rot and heat ration in my crotch itched, and now 2 dudes got wasted down by the garbage dump. Probably by Mama-san, who we had just given a bunch of food to. It's also overwhelming. Sometimes you're in a firefight, a little exchange. Sometimes it's a full-blown action, and you've got artillery coming in, and you've got enemy all around you, and you don't know from one minute to the next if you're going to be alive by morning. You don't know from one minute to the next if you're going to be alive by the time the moon rises. John sat down in an exhausted heat. The red dust puffed up as he leaned back on his heavy red rucksack and pulled a cigarette from a small plastic container he kept stuck in the camouflage band around his helmet. The long hours for the Battle of Hue City had lulled into a sudden stillness, leaving the soldiers of the 101st Airborne wondering if the 1968 Tet Offensive was over. They hoped it was, because the low cloud cover had prevented them any access to air support from Navy jets. And Charlie had been pounding them unmercifully with everything he had. Looking around through tired 18-year-old eyes, John witnessed the carnage of a once beautiful Asian city. Not one building had escaped being riddled with millions of pockmarks from bullets and shrapnel. The city was a complete shambles. Across the open square in front of him lay dead, mangled people and cattle. Cries of pain and wails of grief came from every direction. 160-degree sun already was boiling the putrid odors of decaying flesh and excrement into his nostrils, and he felt a helplessness engulfing him. It was as if he had fallen into a dream with no control to stop it. There was nothing he can do about where he was or what was going on around him. He must have already died and gone to hell, he reasoned. This is what it was like there. This was the only logical answer for what he was experiencing. But what had he done to deserve being there? It all seemed lost in that moment. His life could never be the same. You get these experiences, some of them completely overwhelming you, some of them just the constant shock of witnessing death or dealing death or watching things get blown up, watching things be destroyed. I mean, this is a war, right? That's what people do in war. And there's no time to stuff it. There's nothing to do but stuff it. There's no time to process it. Your best buddy dies, and you may have a half an hour to grieve. Then you have to get back to work. There's a war on. People's lives depend on it. So you do your cry or whatever it is that you can do for that half hour, and then you put on your pack and you pick up your rifle and you go back to work. One of the things that I felt was a major factor in the PTSD that I experienced was the asymmetry, the irony of the fact that they put me through 8 weeks of training to turn me into a soldier, but they gave me absolutely no clue how to be a civilian again.
It only takes 8 weeks?
Okay. We were to leave at 0600 the next morning, and we drank beer till around 0300 hours. It just flopped in a cot inside a small shack when the VC began to mortar the helicopters on a pad next to our tiny compound. They missed the choppers and hit us instead. 7 guys died just 3 hours before boarding the Freedom Bird. I battle-dressed shrapnel wounds on my arm and rolled my sleeve down so no one would see that I'd been hit. There was no way I was going to take a chance of being medically detained from leaving at 0600. As far as I was concerned, they could give my Purple Heart to one of the dead guy's parents. I wasn't missing my flight. I'll never forget landing at Travis Air Force Base in California. My mouth must have gaped wide when I saw the manicured lawn, clean streets, and women who were as tall as I. The airport at San Francisco was equally awesome and mysterious. A young couple passed by me talking about buying a new refrigerator. Someone else was talking about driving up through the redwoods, and a student with long hair was packing his skis. Not one person I saw was on the alert for danger. No one seemed to know or care that my friends were humping the bush and dying in rice paddies and jungles that very night. My plane touched down at the Seattle-Tacoma airport. I disembarked and went inside. My mother walked right past me in the terminal. She didn't even recognize me. I stood and watched her without saying a word. At that moment, I knew life was not going to be the way I dreamt about as a short timer when I was in the Iron Triangle.
Is that your work, Jim?
No. This is from Chuck Dean's excellent book,
Oh,
Nam Vet. I disagree with him a little on his conclusions, but the passages he quotes are right on. Okay, so we go over there. I was drafted. I was given a uniform. I go through training. I get a month of leave before going over in country. I report to an airport. They fly me over in 30 hours. I'm dropped into a unit by myself. I'm dropped into somebody's unit. I serve a year, try to stay alive for that year. I come out by myself. I'm sent home by myself. And I get off the plane by myself and try to figure out how to be a civilian again. Compare that with what happened, say, in World War II. In World War II, you trained as a unit. When you were ready to go over, they put you on a boat, and all 2,000 of you in the battalion went over there together. You had a chance to develop relationships. You served your tour. Those of you that survived got on a boat together, spent 2 weeks coming home, where you could talk with your peers about what had happened. Dramatic difference in the way the two wars were conducted. At one congressional hearing, the person that was testifying said that it looked like the way that the United States was handling its military personnel was purposely designed to give people PTSD. Okay, symptoms.
Yeah. Good question. So why would they have done that?
They thought it was a good idea at the time.
To get
Okay,
people
they had a draft. When they started, they didn't think the war was going to be any big deal.
We'll be home by
They
Christmas.
well, yeah. They figured the LAPD could walk across the whole country in 24 hours. You know, they I mean, this is an Iron Age. This is an Iron Age culture, right?
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
how tough can they be, right?
Well, we're
And-
not an Iron Age. Anyway.
Right. But that was the idea. And so what they did is they pulled people in as they needed them and sent them over there by themselves. In the past, apparently PTSD wasn't so prevalent, or at least so obvious, so it never became a major health issue. Okay? After Vietnam, we had people climbing towers on universities and opening fire.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we
Right?
did.
After that happened for the 12th or so time, the country had to pay attention and think, oh, wait, maybe there's something about that war that causes people to be messed up.
Well, and the people, and when you came back, there wasn't the parades and the.
Yeah, there wasn't recognition, and in fact there was frequently hostility.
Right. That can't help.
That doesn't help. For one thing, it's very disorienting. I mean, think about it. I went over there, took the chance of dying, got wounded, took the chance of dying, so that you wouldn't have to.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you asked me to do that. And when I came home, what did you do?
Spit in your face.
Some of that. Yeah, some of that. That was, we walked back into essentially a low-level civil war,
Yes,
right?
did.
There were a lot of people that were against the war. And as it turned out, they were actually right. The war was a turkey.
But it wasn't your fault that you fought.
Right. And the people that sent me over there were disgusted because I didn't win the football game. They were treating it like it was a game, and I was supposed to win it. I was supposed to bring home the pennant, and I didn't do that. And so they didn't want to talk to me. Actually, as it turned out, I in particular got on better with war protesters than with the people that sent me. Because I could see their point. I didn't necessarily agree with it at that time, but I could see it. And I treated them as honorable enemies. I mean, they got out in the street, they got their head busted, they got thrown in jail, they got run out of the country. Right? That's an honorable enemy. The people that sent me there were untrustworthy friends. Right? Big difference. My second wife was a war protester. When we first got acquainted, we yelled at each other a lot, but we were talking. Right? The people that were in favor of the war didn't want to talk to me. Okay, symptoms. This is a list put out by the psychologists and psychiatrists in the United States and Canada working with the Disabled American Veterans Outreach Program. They include depression, cynicism, and distrust of government and authority. I wonder why. Anger, alienation,
in the service, and I do that.
sleep disturbances, concern with humanistic values overlaid by hedonism, tendency to react under stress with survival tactics,
Yep.
psychic or emotional numbing, negative self-image, memory impairment, emotional constriction, hypersensitivity to justice, loss of interest in work and activities, problems with intimate relationships, survivor guilt, difficulty with authority figures, hyper-alertness, avoidance of activities that arouse memories of traumas in the war zone, emotional distance from children, wife, and others, self-deceiving and self-punishing patterns of behavior, such as the inability to talk about war experiences, fear of losing others, and a tendency to fits of rage. Suicidal feelings and thoughts, flashbacks to Vietnam, fantasies of retaliation and destruction, which is where the climbing the tower with a loaded rifle came from. One that they didn't have on here is substance abuse. That was very common too. Okay, so if we include substance abuse, we had 24 symptoms listed, and of those 24, I was able to relate to 20 of them.
Wow.
So I had about 80%, a little over 80% matchup.
Jim, you're such an overachiever.
Yeah,
Yes, you are.
I admit. In this case, yes. Okay, nightmares. The guy waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that he's strangling his wife is real. That's not an urban legend. It actually happened more than once. Depression. Let's think back to the one in where the guys got ambushed trying to go for charcoal for a cookout. Okay. There was nothing that this guy could do. Over in Way, the city's completely destroyed, and there's nothing he can do about it. Depression, it tends to be low self-image and a feeling of helplessness. There were plenty of instances of that. They were very available. Survivor guilt, that's a biggie. That's a biggie. There were several people that I knew personally that were better soldiers than I was, and were better human beings than I was. And I'm here and they're not. And that hurts. Outbursts of rage, that's a survival reaction. Self-hatred. Oh, I got a good one for this one. We spent 3 weeks at Benoit Air Base, completely isolated from outsiders. We ate nothing but gook food so that our sweat would smell like the natives. We turned in our army gear and they issued us Chinese and Russian weapons, black pajamas, sandals, and rice paddy hats. During the night we would slip out of our tiny compound and probe American perimeter lines. This was to accustom us to being on the other side. I actually felt more secure out there than I ever did when I was assigned to an American unit. During that same time, we would receive special instructions about our new war. We learned stuff that not even the top brass in Vietnam would ever get their hands on. I'll never forget our first pacification mission. 2 of us, Americans, were assigned to a 5-man friendly gook team and dropped off under cover of darkness near a small village somewhere north of the Iron Triangle. It was around 2 in the morning when we entered the village. The friendly gooks rousted out a family into the center of the hooches. 3 small children, one in a mother's arms, an old lady and old man. The entire family was quickly beaten to the ground, shot through the head, and disemboweled by our counterparts. I held back my vomit as I retched deeply in the guts. My American partner and I hung back as lookouts so we wouldn't be identified as Americans by the rest of the villagers. Upon leaving the village, the friendlies yelled out obscenities to the rest of the village and made verbal evidence that we were Viet Cong. The purpose of the mission was to win the hearts, souls, and minds of the people by letting them know just how bad the Viet Cong were, when really it was us trying to make them look bad. The mentality of that war was absolutely unreal. I'll never be able to forgive myself for allowing that to happen. That was the Phoenix Project, which was a CIA false flag operation. False flag operation is when you go do nasty stuff and you try and blame it on the other guys. Okay, so they were engaging in terrorism.
Like the Boston Tea Party.
Like the Boston Tea Party. They were engaging in terrorism and trying to blame it on the Viet Cong. The average soldier in Vietnam didn't do that. Right? This was CIA, something completely different. But those were the guys we admired. Those were the elite soldiers. I mean, think about it. How do you feel when somebody says SEAL Team 6? I mean, we have a TV series on them, right?
Top of the top.
These are our elite guys. They're the heroes, and they can do remarkable things like prisoner rescue. but they also do assassinations. They're an elite combat team, which means that they kill people. That's what they were trained to do. And these guys were the elite people, and we were in the profession of killing. And these were the guys at the top of the profession, so they were the ones we admired. They were the ones that we tried to emulate. Now, imagine it's 5 years later. You've been out of the Army for 5 years. And your military values and your military mindset have disappeared. You've taken on civilian values and a civilian mindset. But those memories didn't go away, did they?
No.
All of a sudden, you're trapped in the same body with somebody you don't like very much. In my case, I was trapped in the same body with somebody I despised. What happens next?
Try to get yourself away from that person,
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah,
hurt that person,
yeah.
or maybe
Yeah, so one of the things that happens is substance abuse, right? Self-medicating. Booze won't make it go away. Won't let you forget, but it'll put it away for a while. Okay, it's a numbing agent, right? Alcoholism in Vietnam veterans is through the roof. Another one is suicide. When I was suicidal, I was in a mindset where I was prepared to do anything to stop the pain. Anything. And the reason why I was willing to do anything to stop the pain is because I couldn't believe that it would ever be better. Right? When I was in that mindset, it was going to be like this for the next 1,000,000 years. If I didn't die, I wouldn't have to die because I was already in hell. I could have been here for eternity repenting for my sins because it was that bad. And what I had in mind was a one-car accident. I had a pretty good plan, actually. I was quite proud of it. I was going to stop at my favorite sushi place after work, have enough sake so that being impaired was plausible. There was a long straight stretch on the way home that made an abrupt left turn. Forget to put on my seatbelt. Over the course of that mile of straight road, I could get up a pretty good speed, far too fast to make that turn. It was a freeway frontage road, which meant that the sound wall made the curve when the road curved and then went off again. I was planning on hitting that corner of the sound wall. What saved me was that I was so depressed I couldn't execute the plan.
Oh, wow.
Right? Executing a plan takes work, and I was so depressed I couldn't get myself to do it.
work and energy. Yep.
So later on, when antidepressants became common, and they were having instances of, say, 6 weeks after the start of taking the medicine, the person commits suicide, I knew all about that. You know, the person took enough antidepressants to be functional, but they hadn't yet had enough to feel good. Okay? So they just went ahead and carried out the plan. People that have never been depressed have absolutely no idea what a blessing it is to feel ordinary. you know, to just be at zero. You know, I didn't have to feel good. All I just had to feel was not in pain, not feel bad. And it was such a blessing. Anyway, I drink too much. I know it. How many of you have seen me drunk? The reason is because I do my drinking sitting on my recliner in my living room between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. I know it's too much because it's somewhere between twice and 3 times what the doctors recommend, which is 2 drinks a day. And most of the time it lets me get to sleep. I don't have nightmares, but I do have a lot of trouble getting myself to turn off. I tend to be quiet and laid back, but when I'm being quiet and laid back, I'm also being very watchful.
Still water runs deep.
Yeah, and so it's hard for me to get off high alert. It's hard for me to give up consciousness, because if I'm not conscious, I don't know what's going to happen next. Okay, recovery. Let's talk about recovery. In my experience, I had to talk with peers. It was the Vietnam veterans rap groups that was effective for me. I couldn't talk to civilians. They just didn't get it. I'd talk to a civilian shrink, and he would be blathering on about me being in fear of my life. Well, yeah, I was in a dangerous job, right? But driving on the freeway is dangerous too. People don't go crazy from driving on the freeway. You just get used to it. And if the freeway drives you crazy, it's not because it's dangerous to drive on. It's what happens to you while you're on the freeway. If you're in a 10-car pileup, or you witness a 10-car pileup, then you can have a bad reaction to the freeway. Well, it's the same thing in combat. It's a dangerous job, but it was the things I saw, and the things that I did, and the things that I wanted to do, even if I didn't do them, and the things that I was told to do, even if I didn't really want to. And the whole mindset. I mean, if you're adjusted to combat, then you're a psychotic killer by normal standards. You kill people without thinking about it. And you have to. You can't stand there, if somebody's shooting at you, you can't stand there and think about it. You can't go philosophical. Right? You just go physical. You just react. You let the animal out. You have to. So, how do I tell this to a civilian shrink? I mean, I couldn't tell him this stuff. I was a monster. I was a monster, and I knew it. That's why I was there in the first place. I was in the body with somebody. I was in the same body with somebody I despised. The guy's going to excuse himself and go dial 911 and get the the first responders out there with straitjackets and haul me off. the other reason I couldn't talk about it was the reason I went in the first place. Nobody goes to war for God and country. That's bullshit. We go to war for Mom and Mary and the kids. Right? We go to war so that you don't have to. The sacrifice means something if I'm there and you don't have to be. Right? I didn't want to be there, but since I was there, I wanted it to just be me. It's like being a leper, right? You learn you're a leper. The first conversation with God is, why me? But the second conversation with God is, let me be the only one. Okay? I went so that you wouldn't have to, and that was essentially my only saving grace in that experience. So why in the world would I subject you to the horrors of combat by telling you what I did? I mean, that's why I went, is so that you wouldn't have to know about that stuff. And you know, the problem with knowing something is that there's no way to unknow it. So, I had to talk to my peers. For one thing, I discovered that if I had some ghastly story, and I had a few, one of the guys in the group that I'm with had one that was just as bad. If I was a monster, then they were monsters too, and two monsters can talk each other down, right? I mean, you know, at least I know they're not going to run away screaming. And on the other hand, if they're not monsters, then I'm probably not either. You know, I mean, if it's just me that's waking up in the middle of the night trying to strangle my wife, or going for my handgun when I hear a car backfire, then I'm nuts. But if there's at least one other person, then it's a medical condition, right? There's hope, right? There's hope. So there was that. And there's also kind of a spiritual component, which is something that should interest us as ministers. The people that were going over there were like 18. Okay, I was 20 years old. I was an old man. They tended to be 18-ish. They just got out of high school. They had a very naive view of God. You know, dear God, let me pass this test, and I'll, I don't know, attend service on Sunday. You know, well, in combat, that doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. And so a lot of times in combat, religion just gets thrown out the window. Spirituality just gets thrown away because to the person that's on the ground watching his buddies get killed, it feels like God's a traitor too. The people that send him are traitors, and God's a traitor too. Otherwise, why would he be in this position? And helping them find a way to a spiritual component to all this is useful because it helps make sense of it. You know, that's what we do. We're human beings, right? We make sense of things, even if they're completely random, even if they absolutely don't make sense. We still figure out a way to make sense of them. and that helps. The thing that this guy, Chuck Dean, recommends was something called Point Man International, which is a faith-based self-help group run and staffed completely by Vietnam veterans.
Wow.
It's sort of on the 12-step model. If you encounter somebody with PTSD or that you suspect has PTSD, don't try to fix it. We can't. We don't have the training. But we can listen. Okay? Be a good, active listener. I mean, really listen. I remember a conversation I was having with the wife of a friend of mine who was also a Vietnam veteran, same unit I was in. And he was able to achieve something that I wasn't, and that was that he brought all of his guys back alive. And I was explaining to her my respect for him for being able to do that. And what she said to me was, "It wasn't your fault." Which meant she wasn't listening to me at all. I was offering a token of respect from a peer, and she was trying to fix it. Okay? Just listen. Okay? Just listen. Okay. Relationship with the rest of the spectrum. So far it's been heavily weighted in my experiences, heavily weighted on Vietnam. War has changed since then. We don't have a war going on now that's being handled exactly like Vietnam was being handled, but the new wars have new problems of their own that add to the stress disorder. My opinion is that PTSD is just the end of the spectrum. It's not something separate. It looks like it's separate because it tends to be so much worse than its closest competition. But that's because we really have no close analog to combat here in the U.S. We still have stress, right? I've been working with Janet on the CISM briefings, and the stories I hear from the people that we're debriefing are very much like many of the experiences I had in combat.
Excuse me, could you say what those initials mean for the people that may not know?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's critical incident stress management. They work with first responders of all kinds. We did together. Janet and I did a debriefing for animal services. They're a uniformed force. They look a lot like police, except that have animal services on the patch, and they're in it because they love animals. And what they were talking about was a wildfire and a herd of 24 goats trapped inside a paddock that was burning, and not being able to get away and having to jump through the fire. Some of them didn't make it, and what it was like for these people that love animals to have to deal with all that death and destruction. Or earlier in February, when the floods were here, they had one incident where there was 30 horses on this island out in the river. They were stable there. Normally you could just drive out there, but the river was so high that the island was cut off. The horses were stranded. There was 30 of them. They couldn't drive a truck in. They didn't have a boat that was anywhere near big enough to take horses. They might have been able to helicopter out one or two, but to helicopter a horse, you have to sedate it and hook it up in a harness. 30 was impossible, so they're standing there watching the flood and absolutely helpless, worrying about what's going to happen to these animals that they love. As it turned out, in that case at least, they got lucky. The water got up to the horses' bellies. The owners went out there in canoes and kayaks and made sure that they had food and water, and eventually the water went down and they were able to go out and pull them off. But those are the types of instances of incidents you see in combat. Death and destruction. There's a common thread here, right? People, things, animals, and so on that you care about being destroyed for some reason or another, right? In this case, it was a wildfire or a flood. The reason why I believe that combat produces symptoms that are so much more obvious than the stress injuries that the critical incidents produce is because they happen quicker, there's more of them, and there's absolutely no time to process. So my feeling is that people that are in jobs that have critical incidents, where they're suffering that stress, could work into PTSD, full-blown PTSD, if they don't take care of themselves. If they don't have debriefings, if they don't talk about it, and so on. To me, it's just the extreme end of a spectrum. And it looks like it's separate simply because the combat environment is so radically different and more extreme than anything else that we...
And goes on longer.
And goes on longer, yes. Yes, the toughest neighborhood in the U.S. doesn't have as much violence in one day as a firefight. Okay, any questions? Am I seeing a stunned silence out there? Yes, Lynn?
Well, just in response to what you just said about do we have any analog to the combat, makes me think about what was going on when I was a very young teenager in the anti-war movement.
Mm-hmm.
There was quite a swell toward the anti-war movement, but there are sources now that suggest that certain drugs were deliberately leaked into that community to stop that. And I remember seeing people die. And I remember going through therapy for anxiety for a long time about, somebody is there and then they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're in mental hospitals, all these things that happened. And I think that it wasn't combat, but it was an extraordinary time. And there were things that were going on here. Adults who probably should have known better becoming mentors for very young teenagers or still children to, be in that world, to pass these tests, having to do with drugs and other really unsafe things, and a lot of homeless kids, and so maybe it's not combat, but to me, it had elements of that.
It was very, very stressful, yeah, I can
And there are
believe
people
that.
with PTSD that took years to get over it.
Okay, any more? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you say more about all of the years, because you were, like you said, you were 20, 21, 22 years old when you went through that, when you actually lived that experience. And then most of the time, because you clearly come a long way since then, there's still stuff there, I'm sure. We always, have those things. And like you and I were talking the other day, the stuff that's still in the closet, right?
Yeah.
You push it into the closet and
Yeah, and then it leaks out.
there's some leaks in the closet, and maybe there's a monster in the closet. I wonder about that too, like the monster that you were describing. Sometimes I think maybe there's a feeling that the monster's also in the closet, and it's hard to get close to the closet because, you know, but in any event, my question really was, you said you went to these rap groups with other veterans because they could get more, what you were saying, that experienced something similar. Is that kind of what got you through to where you are now, or were there other things?
It was the starting point. I was in therapy for about 40 years.
Wow.
With a civilian therapist?
Yeah, more or less. I came from a dysfunctional family, and I was dealing with chronic depression before I ever went into the Army. So I kind of had a head start on it.
Insult to injury.
Fortunately for me, and there's a lot of substance abuse in my family. Out of 9 of us, only 2 of us are actually functional. This stuff was my drug of choice since about 6th grade, since about 10 years old. Okay? Literature is a pretty addictive substance. As addictive substances go, though, it has some real advantages. One advantage is that I have this absolute storehouse of useless information. I can tell you all kinds of bizarre things just so long as there's no practical use for them.
That's a requirement, huh?
Yeah. Did you know that Menelaus and Helen of Troy, when they came back home to Sparta, had a daughter named Hermione?
No. Now I'm stuck with it too.
Yeah. Did you know that?
Did you have red hair?
I have no idea. Did you know that in 4 billion years the sun's going to turn into a red giant, and if we're not out of the solar system by then, we're crispy critters? But it won't explode because it's not big enough to get, and it won't get hot enough. What it'll do is it'll collapse to a lump of coal about the size of Jupiter that will have a diamond about the size of Earth.
Aren't you glad to know that?
Inside of it.
Yeah. So what you're saying, it was an escape, literature, like reading is kind of an escape from
Still
whatever
is.
thoughts would want to
Still
come
is. That's the downside, is I can spend 10 hours a day doing it. Just ask my wife. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of people in my family were policemen.
Yeah.
And in my uneducated view, that's very close, as close as we probably have
agree.
in this country.
I agree.
And my brother used to say to me, I used to say, "Oh, you're so pessimistic," and he said, "Sure I am. You go through life and you walk on the boards over the sand, and I go through life and I kick them over to see what's growing underneath, because that's my job to take care of that."
Yeah.
And so you orient yourself differently, and you don't talk about it because nobody at the Thanksgiving table wants to hear how you responded to a call at the house and some guy was high on drugs and bashed his baby's brain out, and you know.
Right, exactly.
I mean, what I'm saying is it's not similar, and their shift is over. I think that's a huge thing. Their shift is over, so they can either go get drunk with their friends or go home, depending upon how they can function. But I think that we miss a boat in this country, and I'm putting this out here to get your take on it, in not having recovering and retired policemen be part of the group that's available to talk to veterans who have, because I don't know if we have enough of the groups that you go
Sure.
to.
No, I'd be for that. I'd be for that.
They have to be trained, but I think the closest, one of the things is, and I've been in therapy for a long time, and I thought, well, I could tell this therapist everything, but then would they stay in the room? Because before you tell somebody something, whoever you are, whatever painful thing you're telling them, you have to say to yourself, will they stay in the room?
Yeah.
Because if they won't stay in the room, you've done yourself you're down a notch. And so that's what anybody who's had an experience, and my experience are nothing compared to my brother's or yours, or, but what I'm saying for anybody who has to share something that's painful, you have to always ask that question. And that, I struggle with how can I help? We're all helpers in this room. You wouldn't bother to be here if you weren't a helper. And I think one of the things is if we could expand somehow the resources. And I absolutely agree that it can't be us. I've heard some pretty crummy things because of things my brother has been willing to share with me and things that happened to me. But I don't know that I could just not let my eyelashes flicker when somebody said to me, well, I had to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And if you can't not let your eyelashes flicker, if you can't just sit there and say, that must have been hard, or at the very most.
Yeah, or a domestic violence victim, or a childhood sexual abuse victim, or
But
a
those
torture victim, those.
those are easier, honest to God. I did some employee assistance, Barbara and I did some pastoral counseling things. You can stay with those because it's often a finite experience. With a domestic violence, they have to come to the place where they understand what they're experiencing is worse than the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But even with a childhood abuse, you can stay in the room with that because it's over now.
Eventually came to an end.
You're
yeah.
adult,
Yeah.
they're old or whatever. But with the militaries, and especially it seems to me, and that's one of my other questions for you, that the Vietnam was so complicated. First of all, you were in and you were out.
Yep.
You were there for a year, most people, and then they could come home in a year, and most people did. And so you didn't have the same level of, when you talk to people who went through World War II, you went in together, and as long as you were alive, you stayed together to see what you could do to get to Berlin.
Yeah, and you might have been together for several years.
Right.
Yeah, 4 years or so, yeah.
But neither your leadership nor your teammates were going to be there longer than a year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
how do we help
so
those people, of all people?
I'd be dropped into an existing unit. I'd be the new guy for a while. Eventually I'd be pulled out. Other new guys would come in, other old guys, other short-timers would leave. In some ways the unit had no cohesion.
Guess that.
Compare that with, say, the old regiment model where your whole battalion was recruited together, trained together, and when it was time to go overseas, you got in the boat and you went over there together. And, and they had the regimental traditions and all that stuff to give a feeling of solidarity. Now that I'm no longer a young man, when I first got out of the Army, I couldn't wear anything green for, I don't know, a decade, 2 decades. I couldn't wear anything green. It was just too close to the truth, and too close to what had been real life for me there for a while. But now that I'm older, I occasionally get together and with other people who are wearing military regalia, and this is one of the places where I disagree with Chuck Dean. He says that middle-aged guys get together with their combat buddies to recapture their virility, recall a time when they were chick magnets, and well, I never had much virility in the first place, so I was never a chick magnet ever. And for me, and besides, it doesn't feel like that. For me, it feels like the camaraderie of a shared hardship. When I was coming out of Vietnam, I was wounded. I got wounded last month in country, and I was in a hospital in Osaka, Japan. And one of the orderlies there had been a medic during the Second World War. Since we were in Japan, he was a medic in the Japanese army. And we got along great. We were soldiers. We were honorable enemies. He would tell us about the field techniques he used to treat wounded soldiers at that time. There were meetings after the Second World War where the English soldiers and the German soldiers got together and they talked about, you know, the shared experience.
Now it's different.
Yeah. Although I do have a tendency, if I meet somebody that's Vietnamese, to apologize to them. If it's from my generation, I apologize for trying to kill them, or the possibility, at least, of trying to kill them. If they're younger, which is now it gets to be more and more frequent, I apologize for running around their country with a loaded rifle. Forgiveness is a powerful healing tool, and a lot of Vietnam vets haven't figured that one out. A lot of them still hate Jane Fonda. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of them still hate the war protests in general, right? And the sad part is that ultimately the protesters were right. The world, not necessarily for the reasons that they thought, right? I have no way to judge whether the morality of the war, which is what they were protesting, usually, was justified or not. But as a matter of national policy, it was an expensive quagmire. I mean, we were in there for billions of dollars, and the casualties, and the people that were supposed to be our real enemies, the Soviet Union and China, were in it for a couple of million of obsolete weapons, mostly light weapons, that they just shipped over the border, and they didn't have any casualties at all. We were tied up, costing us a lot of money and a lot of body bags, and they were paying a pittance to ship some arms to their proxies, right? Because that was a proxy war, and you know, and just looked at from a strategic point of view, it was nonsense. We had, you know, it was killing us, and actually did serious harm to our economy. The problem with the wartime economy is that you make a lot of stuff, expensive stuff, that nobody can buy. So it tends to be inflationary. It also tends to produce shortages. And that's what we were doing. We were making a lot of armament, very expensive stuff, expensive planes, expensive helicopters, sending them over there to get them blown up.
Bell helicopter.
What's that?
Bell helicopter.
Yeah, Bell Helicopter was doing great. So was Grumman. Yes, ma'am.
When you came back, and you didn't quite tell us, like, when you began to recognize what we now call the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, did they start to occur to you right after the incidents when you were in country, or did this happen when you got home?
It takes a while. It takes a while. I was coming back to an alien culture, and it takes a while to acclimate to an alien culture. And so for a while, you know, my military training carried me. The attitudes didn't just disappear when I stepped off the plane. They were still there. And it lasted about 5 years. But I did notice the gradual change, and I did notice about how long it took.
You had the symptoms. Was it not until 5 years with the nightmares, the numbness?
Well, that I started noticing.
Noticing it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
You know, one of the things that is interesting was, you mentioned the Greeks. I've often thought of Achilles at the walls of Troy praying to Zeus for strength. And looking at, I was in San Francisco during the 60s in the anti-war movement. I joined the reserves in 62, and by 66, I was on the other side. I was on both sides. And one of the things we learned, of course, I never showed disrespect to a veteran, by the way, was the difference in spirituality, and that's one of my interests. It was like, as you said, alien culture. It was a culture shock.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed is I worked with some of the American Indians. I ran the homeless shelter for the homeless for a while in Santa Clara County. We had a lot of Vietnam vets, so I conferred with some of the Indian medicine men. What they had is they had a different kind of entity that would be lodged in the back of the neck of a lot of Vietnam vets. And the Indians, when the Indians came back, they removed the entities. They prayed for a while, they separated from the people, they did sweat lodges and spiritual practice, and then when they felt clear, they went back in the community as honored members of the community.
Yes.
And that's what the rest of America
And that's
forgot.
something that we could do,
Yeah.
right? We're into ceremony, and it's an old tradition, goes clear back to medieval times in the Western world, and probably farther than that in Native American. But yeah, there was a time when when guys came back from war, and they had a cleansing ceremony. They'd they'd take the weapons and bury them and completely cleanse the body, get all the blood off, get all the bad feelings off, and then fully accept them back into the village as full members of the community. That's we're spiritualists, right? We can come up with a
I think
spiritual
that's
ceremony
an
of some
exciting
kind.
idea.
Never too late.
I really appreciate everything that you've said tonight, and my question is not meant to, by any means, cover over or make safe what you've said tonight, because the rawness of it was really wonderful to hear. But my question is, given everything that you've said, where do you rest? Because I hear that you tolerate, but I'm just wondering, is there any place that you rest?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
That also could be the answer, but I can imagine that you've made peace with a lot of places where you go, and you know how to navigate now. But navigating is not resting.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if you can talk at all about where, how, when might you actually be able to not be beating the wolves at the door?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. The answer is no. I really have a hard time turning myself off.
That's why the 10 till 2.
Yeah, that's
routine.
that's why 4 beers a night, or 8 ounces of wine, or 6 ounces of brandy, or whatever it is. It quiets the urgency enough so that I can stop running escape plans, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the VA differentiate, its veterans by the war they served in? Do they have
Support groups versus
an understanding that you might need something different, or are they strictly tied to the medical model that says this is what's presenting and so this is what we'll take care of?
Yes and no. They are changing because it's being forced upon them. But it doesn't happen very quickly. sometimes that's not their fault. I mean, they're a massive organization, they're underfunded, and nobody in a position of responsibility keeps track of what they're doing, or at least didn't. You know, otherwise we wouldn't have
Less
had
likely to happen now.
the VA backlogs that go that go on for years. Fortunately for me, right, one of the things that goes on for years is determining whether it's military related. You come in there with something wrong with you, and you know they're basically supposed to treat things that are related to your service in the military. And in my case, fortunately, I had a good VA advisor when I was getting out of the Army. I came out from Beaumont Hospital in El Paso, Texas, and he said, whatever you do, first thing, file a claim. File a claim for your wounds. Even if all you think you're going to ever have is scar tissue, file a claim. That way, if there's ever any problem with them and you want the VA to help you take care of it, you don't have to prove that it's service connected because the claim's already been filed. And I did that, and as it turned out, I got a 10% disability for this scar in my stomach that runs from my sternum down to my pubic bone.
In the leg.
Yeah, and of course the one on the leg, yeah, right.
I was just thinking that, when you hear on the news, you know, that they're complaining about the VA services and all, and now they're trying to hire more mental health workers. And the mental health workers that will be hired, bless their hearts, don't have a clue of what you've been talking about.
Right, they're civilians.
So
right.
how much good is that gonna be doing
I
if
don't
and
know.
when they are hired?
You remember once when you were called out for a grief counseling at a school, and got there and they had the volunteers over here that didn't have any degrees, but they'd been volunteering for 20 years and had done 1,000 debriefings.
Yeah.
And they had the psychologists over here that had masters and had never done a debriefing in their life, but they knew perfectly well that they had the answer.
Yeah,
And unfortunately the school agreed with them, so they ignored the people that knew what they were doing and went with the ones that thought they knew what they were doing. And the whole debriefing was a waste of time. Well, that's what I envision. Something like that. Occasionally, you'll get a veteran that came out of the service and decided they wanted to go into mental health, and will end up with a master's in psychology or something. And that person will be a big help. If they are willing to take volunteers into that kind of work, then the volunteers might be a big help. The civilians would need a boot camp of some kind. I mean, if they just throw them into the shark tank, they'll get eaten alive.
A few lectures from vets like you.
Yeah. I mean, they really need to have some idea what the feelings this person is dealing with are. And that's something that there's no textbook for yet. Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to stand up with a psychologist. It's only been 100 years since Freud came off his cocaine, and I think a lot of psychologists, as we learn, that was my graduate degree in psychology, is learning how to overcome our addiction problems. And I think once that happens, psychology will listen to the volunteers.
Okay.
But some will, and I worked in psychiatry also. I worked in inpatient psychiatry as well as doing an employee assistance program. And why the hell did I raise my hand? I can't remember now.
That's all right. I do it too.
Sorry.
I hate it when it happens to me. Yes, ma'am.
So Jim, where do we find, if we run into people who could benefit perhaps from the peer groups that you're talking about that were so helpful to you, where would we find that kind of a resource to direct?
Well, this guy gives a phone number for the resource that I mentioned. I'm assuming that there are resources like that that are aimed towards the more modern conflicts. I mean, you know, this conflict is going on 50. It's almost old enough to join AARP.
Well, the current conflict raises similar issues of civilians being attacked. I mean, the military.
Yes.
You know, where historically,
Yes, in some
soldiers
ways.
tried to shoot at soldiers. Military civilians may have been, but now civilians can presume to be attacked.
Yeah,
in places like Syria
and they
and
can be
Afghanistan.
reasonably presumed to be enemy soldiers.
Right.
You know, you can't, in this conflict, you can't look at anybody and have any idea
Right.
whether they're dangerous or not.
Uh-huh.
So
That's right.
we end up with sad scenarios like a busload of schoolgirls on their way to school, not stopping at a roadblock because the sign that says stop is written in English, and all they read is Arabic, and not understanding the guard telling them to stop, not having any clue what it is they're supposed to do until somebody opens fire on them. Or on the other hand, you have young women willing to put on explosives and blow themselves up.
Well, and you have, you know, I have obviously come from a big family, but one of my nephews that was in the war said they would take a child and say, you have to go out with this explosive because I have your mother here and I'm going to kill her if you don't do what I say.
Yeah.
So that makes it impossible to know who's really a threat, and I think that has to be an element of the.
It's a whole new dimension to the stress. Yeah, absolutely. Imagine you were on that roadblock, and you're the one that shot up that school bus, and when you searched the school bus, all you found was dead schoolgirls. You know, 15 years old, trying to get an education. How do you feel when you go home, right? Yeah, it's going to be a whole new dimension to that kind of post-traumatic stress, combat and
There is
induced
one
stress.
group, General Mokyama in Chicago has organized military outreach, which is trying to get the church communities and faith communities to be able to be a place where veterans could go in the faith communities and meet. This is just happening. He was out here last year. His
Is that the
nephew is
SOS
on the mental
project?
health board.
Is that the? Is
So
that
that's
the?
one group, military outreach.
Okay.
There's a bunch, there's several of them.
Okay.
I know.
Do you have any literature or a?
I do on military outreach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I may have something on
I think I
SOS.
have a card, but I'm a past president and I'm not going to lose you.
Okay, how are we doing for time? Anybody?
Well, we have 15 minutes if you wanted to use it, or we can wrap it up, and thank you very much, and
Is everybody exhausted?
Pretty exhausting, but pretty wonderful.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I do have another question, because
Okay.
I would love to come up and just hug you and just pour my heart into you, and I'm guessing
You'll have a chance.
Well, but to be serious, I'm guessing it's probably not always a good idea, and I'm wondering about things like you know, not coming up behind somebody in proximity and those kinds of things, and do you
Especially predominant right when they came home.
Yeah.
They were very touchy. If you went in to wake them up like I did with my brother.
Yeah,
Ran.
that is a real consideration. I never had too much trouble with that. but I was an exception.
Because I would imagine it would be important to measure and, read.
Yeah, read body language in particular.
I'm such a expressive, touchy, pushy person that I have to ask because I'm afraid I wouldn't read it right. And so I say, is it all right if I touch you? Is it all right if I touch you? Is it all right if I give you a hug? Or not in my normal church doings, but in a situation where I'm trying someone's asking for help.
Someone in distress.
And I'm not sure exactly what the circumstances are. I do less touching then unless I have permission.
Right. But it's a real consideration because remember if he's having problems with PTSD, then one of the symptoms is reacting with survival skills. Right? And this is a person who had survival skills in a combat zone.
Well, even just the alienation, like kind of blowing it, like I would not want to become unsafe for that person. So it's just recognizing.
Yeah, and if he's erected an emotional perimeter, then basically what it would do is just drive him further into the perimeter because it's under attack.
Yeah.
So.
Good to remember.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Jim, this was really great, your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm grateful for two reasons. The first, as a CISM volunteer training, and the second, my sister and I have two cousins, male cousins who went off to war to Vietnam and didn't come back the same at all.
Oh, wow. Right.
Both isolated, both died young.
Okay.
And tonight, I understand.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's enormous.
That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's a wonderful gift. Thank you for
Thank
telling
you.
me that.
Frank
Yes.
and Tony.
I too want to
Yeah.
just
I
thank
thought
you
Frank
for the depth of the reality you shared. The grittiness of it was, I've known a lot of people. I was, at that age when a lot of people went and came back, but I didn't understand and I never got to hear. And so you really, in that first half hour, really kind of taking us there, was a gift you gave us.
Thank
I
you. Well, then, in
appreciate
that
you
case,
risking to do that.
yeah,
That was a
if I
huge
succeeded in doing that, that was my goal.
Yeah, we got the sensory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted you to
Your
feel
energy
it. 'Cause,
expanded, we got it, yeah.
I've been in the position where I've understood something intellectually and still not had a clue emotionally, and this is one of those situations that lends itself to that, where you have this sort of intellectual understanding of it, but until you get into the feelings, until you understand the feelings a bit, it's just an enigma. Yes, Lynn?
Well, the way that you use words to show versus tell suggests to me that all of your addiction to literature has really paid off, and to continue to create scenes as you did for a writing
Yeah, keep on following, man, good follow.
Keep on reading, Jim.
Yeah, right. Read on.
Writing.
And writing.
Yes, I'm writing.
Through the Iliad.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is not a question. We usually have treats afterwards, and I thought we were going to have treats. So I brought a few tomatoes from my garden.
Yes.
There aren't enough for everybody, but
Thank you.
I just
That's
wanted
very
to share.
kind, and I apologize that, usually I'm
that's
here
okay.
and I'm involved and I figure it out,
Yeah.
but I didn't. And so-
Mary.
Tomatoes are super.
Neither did
It
I.
was meant to.
I was
make you
not,
feel
I
bad.
I just was acknowledging that's why it didn't happen.
Excellent
So,
discussion.
thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. Remember to sign and drop a donation in the basket
Did you
if
sign?
you haven't done so. And again, thanks Jim for.
Oh, you're welcome.
Good job, Jim, you did a great job, thank you so much.
Okay, I think we need to applaud the new reverend on the block. I didn't realize you just got your ministry.
Wow.
Bravo.
like a great idea.
And so it is. And so it is.
Get them up, move them out.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what I was hoping would happen.
Okay.
Their parents